Hi, everybody, and welcome back to our weekly Conversations on the Serial podcast. I'm Pete Rohrbaugh, a professor in the Digital Writing and Media Arts Department at Southern Polytechnic State University, and I'm honored to join Rabia Chaudry every week as we kind of unpack the narrative, the meta-narrative pieces of the Serial podcast. So, Rabia, you want to tell everybody hello?
Hi, everybody. It's Rabia. I'm glad to be back. Thanks for having me, Pete. And I look forward to talking about episode 9 and all other related things.
Right, right. Okay. The first thing I wanted to throw out is this interesting thing that happens in this episode that we haven't heard before, which is when Sarah begins with the idea that she has three pieces that she wants to introduce everyone to that are new to her, and those things being the discussion of the Best Buy phone booth, the discussion from a person named Summer that the 236 call really couldn't be what everybody has thought that it was, at least during the case, and the Aisha interpretation of the call that Adnan gets when he's at Kathy's house.
Yeah.
And that was a pretty, I mean, that was a long stretch of time that the episode went before it really got into what Sarah calls our regularly scheduled program. So I wanted to hear from you how you received all of that, and if that gave you a sense, if that made you feel more like the show was in progress or in process. It gave me that feeling, and I wanted to hear you talk about what that was like for you.
Well, I mean, I know that the show is in progress. The case is in progress. I mean, I've known this, and it's been said so many times by Sarah, by me, by other people, and people just don't want to, I don't know, like understand like really what's happening. A lot of it, there's plenty that she's, there's lots of people she's interviewed beforehand. There's information, but it was bound to happen that as every episode airs, other people are going to kind of come out of the woodwork and be like, oh, by the way, I kind of remember this time. That was bound to happen. So for me, those three pieces of information were not something that I knew before. So I was hearing them for the first time. I've had my speculations on those issues anyways, but for her to kind of, I felt in a way that was her like laying those things to rest.
Mhm.
Like to me, that felt like she's kind of just kind of coming to a conclusion on those things. Like the Best Buy thing was like, well, before it was like I couldn't really find any records and blah blah blah, and now it's like there just wasn't a phone there. Let's just accept that, okay? Um, and then the whole, I mean, and again, the police's time or the prosecution's timeline is bunk. Let's just accept that, okay? Now, in terms of the case, this information is one more, well, three more, three more pieces of evidence at how shoddy this investigation was. Okay. Whether it was the police's job to figure this out or the defense's job to figure this out, it was somebody's job to figure this out, that there was or wasn't a phone booth. How complicated is that, right? You just have to go there.
Mhm.
And so there's that. A lot of the police investigate, a lot of the interviews they took of these people, they took after Adnan was arrested, and it was all over the news. If Jay's giving them certain, and why would they only pull Adnan's cell phone records? Does
Mhm.
that make any? I mean, like for cops who are trying to figure out what really happened, that's not how you operate. This is how you operate when you think you know what happened and you just want to prove a case. But if you really want to find out what the truth is, you hunt everybody's phone records down. Where's Jay's records? Where's Jen's pager records? Where's Hayes' pager record? Where are all these other records that could be? Why didn't they? If they have Adnan's cell phone records, they easily could talk to all the kids in his circle in that magnet program, the people he normally calls, and say, what do you remember of that day? When did you call him? Did you call him? And we would have known 15 years ago that that was Aisha Pittman's call, right?
Mhm.
And not some third party to a murder saying the police are coming for you.
Mhm.
So this is bad police work,
Mhm.
and we'll hear about the defense, I'm assuming, and it was basically it was a non-existent defense. Basically, she didn't do anything to try to disprove the state's case at all.
Mhm.
So that's my reaction to that, and I think you know I think it's rare that Sarah's really definitive about certain things, but I think on these issues she's kind of been like, all right, done and done.
Yeah, that was a significant shift to hear her say, "Can we all just agree that this doesn't make sense?" I think at one point she says, "I'm finished. I'm finished believing that's what this phone call was," or
Right.
something like that. Coming off of that, and given your experience in the legal profession, I wonder I wonder how you view this idea that the container of, if we call a court case an experiment, like an experiment in truth, in figuring out what truth is, and we look at what the boundaries and the rules of that experiment are. And we've gotten very used to the fact that that's an experiment that for the most part we're comfortable with, it works, we know it, it's built into our culture, there's stories about it. Whether we've been to court or not, we kind of know that story, those boundaries. That as we look at what Sarah's done to the journalistic framework, how it's changed, how she's able to get data from people in process. Does it make you feel like does it destabilize the idea of the courtroom being a valid experiment for figuring out truth? I know that's kind of a philosophical question, but it relates to a bunch of other things for me, and I'd like to just hear you talk about whether this is just a, another way to get at truth, or whether it really makes us look at our current kind of courtroom boundaries and reimagine them.
I mean, look, I the courtroom is as flawed as the people who are in the courtroom, unless you're going to argue that human beings are, can never make mistakes, can never misremember, can never lie, and we all do. And the courtroom is a function of who human beings are, how we function. I've never looked at the courtroom as a vehicle to ascertain truth. I've looked at the courtroom as a mechanism to function socially. It's a mechanism of accountability, right? I mean, it's just a way to keep society together so that we don't fall to bits. And that's all it is. But I've never believed that the courtroom has been, it's who can do the job best, who's got the better lawyer, um, you know, who's just telling the story better, and who did their work, who put in the work, right? Um, Nobody could argue that the court. I mean, like otherwise, we know we've executed innocent people. That happens all over the world. It happens in this country. We do our best, obviously, but sometimes you don't do your best. And in this case, nobody did their best. Not the cops, not the prosecution, not Adnan's defense. Nobody did their best. They did. They wanted a certain conclusion, and the prosecution and the police wanted a certain conclusion, and they worked towards it. And there's other allegations of abuse and corruption that have come out of the same jurisdiction, and it sounds kind of similar where I mean, so that even leaves Jay's role up in the air. I mean, did he have any connection at all to this crime at all? Or was it just like we need to, and I remember there was tremendous, tremendous pressure on the police to solve this case. Because first, they couldn't find her for weeks and weeks, right? Like I don't know how many weeks, 6 weeks, they couldn't find her. Then she's found murdered. So there was so much pressure from the Korean community. It's a very strong Korean community and Pacific Asian community in the area, and a lot of them are business owners. And there was a hefty reward being offered, and so there was a lot of pressure for this department to perform. And I don't know to what extent that fed into it, but I think when you don't even talk to the people who might know something till like after you've made an arrest, you're not doing your job right. you're not doing what I'm paying my taxes for, at least, you know. So, yeah, so, you know, the courtroom, I think, is just, it's a theater.
Mm-hmm.
It's what it is.
Mm-hmm. A theater with some pretty massive consequences that you don't get when you go to the regular theater.
Yeah, and that's the tragedy of it. That's the travesty of it, is that considering the immense impact of destroying lives, right? Not a life, but lives. Um, it is abhorrent that people don't do their best when they're in that theater.
Mm-hmm.
It's disgusting.
Yeah. Okay. I'd like to come back to that in another conversation, because I'm working out some ideas, and I don't want to drag us into a cul-de-sac that will be less than productive today before I do some writing about it. But the thing that we scheduled to talk about mostly today is the kind of beginning with this article that was written in the All, the AWL, the All, and they quoted you, and how that article talked about white bias and white privilege, and Sarah Koenig's, what the author claimed was Sarah Koenig's kind of ignorance of her own subjectivity, and how talking about that kind of takes us off in a larger direction into issues of race and gender. And I'm wondering if you want to kind of like frame how you've seen that conversation happening, either in just that article or across other things that you've read.
Yeah. Can I kind of first explain how that came about?
Yes.
So I was contacted by the writer, who said that he was interested in exploring some of the racial issues attached to this case. Now, I thought he meant about the actual case, like from 15 years ago, like, you know, the fact that it's like two immigrant communities and then a heavily African-American jury. And I misunderstood, or it wasn't explained to me clearly, like what he meant. I did not know his angle at all. So I said that, you know, I thought that race definitely, I mean, you can't escape optics, right? We're human beings. We are flawed. We come with our biases and our prejudices and our favoritism towards people we identify with.
Mm-hmm.
That's just human nature. That's normal. And so when you have a courtroom in which you have a defendant who, you know, his community looks like a bunch of old men with beards and ladies in scarves, that means something to everybody, depending on where they're coming from, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you have a Korean community, and then you have, you know, an African American witness and an African American jury who maybe they identify with him more. And these are not malicious biases, they're just human conditions. So I was interested in exploring that, and then I think he asked me a bit about how Sarah was like, did she understand these issues, you know? And I said, look, I don't know to what extent, you know, I said I don't think she maybe fully comprehended it, but that's like, you know, I don't know what it's like to be a white woman. I mean, like, she didn't, but she tried to, and then maybe she got it at some point. I don't know. So, you know, that was really it. I had no idea where this was going to go, and I felt deeply bad about the article when it came out. I didn't share it, and I said a number of times when it was shared that I don't agree with the conclusions of this writer, and I didn't know his angle, and I wouldn't have interviewed if I had known it. I'm not saying he's not entitled to it. He's entitled to his view. I don't want it to, you know, my quotes should have been contextualized. If he had told me what his perspective was, then at least I could have said, well, I don't really agree with you, you know. I think Sarah did. I don't think anybody could do a better job of what, you know, she did her best to try to figure these things out that she didn't know. Mm-hmm. I mean, Sarah's not a lawyer. She tried to figure it out. She's not she's not a detective. She tried to figure it out. That's the best a journalist can do, you know, unless he's making some kind of leap to the fact that you can't write about something or you can't do work on an issue unless you are, like, part of a specific culture. You know, that would really hamper a lot of stuff everybody does. So I know I don't agree with that. I'm not saying that Sarah doesn't have certain privileges. So what? I have certain privileges, you know. I mean, I'm college educated. We have a good income. We all have certain advantages and disadvantages, and that's how it is. And I don't think Sarah used that privilege in any kind of negative way on this case. I don't think she went in and said, well, because I'm a white person and my world didn't operate like that, I don't understand any of this. And I'm telling you right now, some of the commentary about the case and the show reflects that kind of privilege much more. Okay, and I'm talking about like
Yeah, talk about that some more.
I'm talking a little bit about the podcast. Okay, so yeah, there are some people who are writing about this and talking about it, and they don't understand that they're coming at it with a very privileged perspective, not understanding certain communities. And Sarah didn't do that at all. I mean, Sarah spent a long time trying to understand, like, what was happening here and why people were acting certain ways. And she even now, I mean, a couple of days ago, she came and I interviewed with her some more. And she had more questions about the community and about the culture, and I answered them. And that's the most I can expect from her, and I appreciate it, instead of her drawing her own conclusions. I mean, so, that's all I have to say about that. I don't agree with it. I think, if anything, it cracked a window into internal issues in the world of journalism, in the world of, in this particular field, which, look, if I work in a certain field, right? And when I feel frustrations when I'm like, I know certain people should be part of certain conversations and they're not, and I'm like, it's because of these privileges people have, the Beltway, DC Beltway privileges. So I think his perspective came from a point of frustration that, he's somebody who is an African American journalist, black journalist, and so he comes up across certain barriers maybe because, in his field. But I don't think you can rest the burden of that on Sarah in this case, in particular. Mm-hmm. And I don't care what color Sarah was. If she had been an African American journalist, I mean, it doesn't matter. She did what nobody else did, And it's the quality of her work and the integrity of her work that makes me trust her. But I mean, I mentioned to you some of the kind of the sexist commentary and perspectives people have about, like, the women in the case, and I've been kind of almost more bothered by that, although not that it necessarily has an impact on the case. But what I've seen on the internet is, I mean, and maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. I just feel like if there were men in these positions, in these roles, the conversation wouldn't be the same. I mean, like, would you? If a man had been reporting, if it was Ira, right? Ira Weiss reporting instead of Sarah, and he had the same conversations with Adnan, or any other man, had the same conversation with Adnan, the same kind of, perspective with Adnan, would that person be accused of being in love with Adnan, of being soft on Adnan? I mean, I've even seen somebody sent me I think it was a thread or something somewhere that said, and pardon the crude language, but it said Sarah should just bang Adnan and get it over with. It's so deeply disrespectful to women who are doing just good work, And so on one hand, you have, Sarah who's being attacked for being soft on Adnan because she's basically doing her job and making sure her source doesn't shut down, right? Like, she has to keep in community. And then you have somebody like me who I have said over and over, I'm an advocate. This is my role. So, I'm being called, I'm a bully, I'm aggressive, I'm just waiting for the bitch word to come. You know what I mean? Like, and again, I feel like, if I was a man with that, it's like you can't win. Either I'm soft and I'm loosey-goosey, or I'm an aggressive, crazy bitch. And I already wrote about how Slate, some of the people on Slate talked about Deirdre, who is an incredible, smart woman with 26 years of experience, and saying that, oh, she's like this, just really being very dismissive of her. So I've been really kind of fascinated with this, especially because, these kind of conversations happen in the Muslim community, and there's like a generation of Muslim feminists who are fighting back and saying that you can't talk about women like that. and you have to respect us for our work and our minds. And so seeing this outside of the Muslim context, outside of the Muslim, like bubble, is interesting, but it also sucks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it makes me think about, part of the beginning of my interest in talking about these things with you is that I am curious about how interactivity and the fact that things kind of don't have the containers around them that they used to because of the internet potentially makes them more democratic, more liberatory, that they open up more kind of bridge for cultural exchange. But at the same time that you start thinking about things like that, you also have to think the opposite of them. And it is true that in this kind of dynamic, 24-hour engagement sphere that Serial has been thrown into, people are reading characters or other actors, agents in the story, or just in the kind of surrounding narratives. They are reading just kind of like slices or surfaces of them, so that somebody can potentially walk away with a not very developed understanding of you and your connection to the case, or Sarah, or like you're saying, Deirdre, or whomever. And it seems like a real, a real liability, a real problem that that digital space gives us the ability to just kind of like throw those unconstructed, unrefined thoughts around, and certainly happens.
Yes, but male privilege prevents that happening to the same extent that happens to women, and that's the truth. I mean, I think when a man is posed as an expert on something, people just accept it, that he's an expert, okay? I mean, mostly.
Mm-hmm.
Lay people at least.
Yeah, I mean, you could make that exact, I mean, you could tie that exactly to the depiction or the response to Jim Trainum and Deirdre Enright. I mean, Jim Trainum, somebody who, has kind of like left the the police detective structure and is now kind of deconstructing it and saying that there are problems with how we do this, and we shouldn't be assuming that but you're right, like
that's a
as
great
an authority
example. And he's the authority, and I haven't seen anybody say that no, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about, right? Like, I haven't seen that. Like, I haven't seen him being dismissed as being biased to the police,
Mm-hmm.
as being this, like we heard it and we thought it was authoritative.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Sarah, who spent a year with this, knows the documents inside and out, knows more than me, has spoken to, I don't know, dozens and dozens of people. She's not taking it seriously. You're just not. I mean, anyhow, but this is my own, this is like, that gender thing is always kind of in the back of my mind in lots of different interactions, and I'm always kind of analyzing things through, are any of these responses happening because they are like gendered responses? But anyway, no, that was that's a good observation. I didn't really think about the response because I don't have to, because I didn't, I don't know. Did you see anything like that with Jim?
No, I did not. But like you, I have slowed down my frequent swims in the Reddit pond.
I was going to say, I got a really interesting email the other day, and it kind of goes to the point you were making about the cultural barriers, kind of. Like, I mean, I think like a Serial, this particular season of Serial is doing some really interesting things. I got an email from somebody who said that you might not realize this, but one thing that's happening is that there is this might be really affecting how people look and talk about Muslims.
Yeah.
And she said that her own mother has like a deep fear and kind of bias against Muslims, right? But she said her mother loves true crime and loves mysteries, so she got her hooked on the podcast. And so now her mom has been listening, and she's feeling this deep sympathy for Adnan. She sees him as a human being. She's hearing all, and she's like, it's really affecting how she views. She's basically just encountering us as people, right? So she said, I just wanted you to know that. And, it had been in the back of my mind because that conversation has been kind of absent, and it's a good thing. I'm glad. I don't want everybody to look at this through the lens of, through that lens. So she's like, it's humanizing. I'm gonna ask her permission to actually reprint her or to post her message to me, because she's like, it's humanizing Muslims in a way that like I haven't seen before. So
Yeah, and I can't remember whether it's somebody that communicated with both of us on Twitter or just to me, but I've had at least two people send similar things to me about how just being able to see a regular kind of like um, Muslim woman talking about these issues like we've been doing, or like other people in the media have been doing since the case started, or since the podcast started, it calls attention to things like authority and places where people are allowed to speak for something,
yeah.
and identity construction, which really is what a lot of this points back to, and how we all kind of get like written by things that we don't really have any control of sometimes.
So by the way, we didn't really talk about the rest of the episode 9, about which the big chunk of was Adnan. Can I ask you what you thought about that?
Yeah. Specifically, or do you want me to just kind
Whatever
of
you
go?
want to say about it, like kind of, whatever your impression. I mean, did that? So I guess my question is, did that change how you thought about him at all?
It didn't change things, but it just every episode I feel like it kind of like makes things deeper and richer. And I really am trying to stay in this space of actually, I mean, like if I'm going to have to respond to that question, and I mean, I would like to, I'm going to be forecasting a lot of things that are in this post that I've been telling you about, that I've been writing since
Oh, okay, okay.
this episode. What was for me like times 10 the most profound episode yet. I mean, the episode that was the most kind of emotional and kind of formatting or reformatting. And so two things. One is that I see lots of parts of this story through literature, because I've studied and taught literary texts that really touch on the kinds of things that Serial is accessing. And the one that came up this week more than anything was this one of my favorite novels, which is The Stranger by Albert Camus. Have you read that before?
I have. It's been a long time, but I read it. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's bound up in all kinds of like peripheral issues that have to do with race and class and Algeria and all kinds of things that were going on in the 40s and the 50s when he was writing it. But more specifically, this character is put on trial for a murder that he absolutely committed. Everyone knows he committed it, but the perspective of people who are looking at him and making assumptions about him because of things that he's done that have nothing to do with the crime itself. So in the beginning, his mother dies, and he goes to her viewing, her wake, and acts in a kind of disconnected way, such that people in the retirement home kind of think that he's removed, or he's not crying or whatever. And this continues to come up in the trial, that he didn't even cry at his mother's own viewing. So clearly he must be this cold-blooded killer. Wow, like there's this scene where he's sitting there before he knows that all this stuff is going to happen, and all these people are kind of like moving around him like ghosts. He feels like they're ghosts, and all of that imagery just came up into my head when I was listening to Adnan talk about and write, because she's reading from his letters about the trial, and how just existentially absurd it is to be somebody. I'm not at the place where I'm not where you are. I'm not able to say I know that Adnan is innocent, because I'm listening to a media production. I don't feel like I could say that. But either way, Adnan is a human being. I'm certain of that, and I know we know what human beings are, and we know how they feel things. So whether he's innocent or guilty, listening to him explain what that experience is like of people talking back and forth about what he's done and what he meant by what he's doing, and not being able to interject, not being able to, correct things or getting to a conversation with them about it. That just, that was
not just not be able to correct, but your whole life is in their hands.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that they're building like a reality that you then have to live inside of.
And it's like every time I've seen him after that, since he was convicted, like we don't. Even the last time I saw him, he's a grown man, right? But it's so painful that from that point, like you said, he's always been somebody else's ward, right?
Mm-hmm.
You see him in the prison. It's like he has to ask the guard, "Can I stand up? Can I go over there? Can I sit down?" His pants have to have elastic waists, His shirt has to be tucked in. It's like he lost complete agency of his life.
Mm.
And never had a chance to say anything, and as a 17-year-old. I'm sorry, it was a hard episode for me, and I just remember him at the trial, and, and I think I remember him also at the trial, just, taking it as seriously as a 17-year-old who's never gotten in trouble will take.
Mm-hmm.
And he was having like some back issues because you sit there in a wooden chair for a long time. Mm-hmm. And then he explained how in holding, it takes a long time, so for hours and hours and hours he's in that position. So every so often he would just like crack his back. He would twist to the left and right and crack his back. And it gave him also an excuse to turn around and smile at us and make eye contact with us. Otherwise, obviously, he has to face court. Mm-hmm. So it was just like, and I think those of us sitting there also felt as helpless as he did. And I'm going to talk about that, after the next episode. I think she's going to talk about Gutierrez and how we had no control, we had no say, we had no power over how she was handling the case, and neither did Adnan. And I wish, I don't know, I wish we had done something then. Like, we could see this train wreck. She was a train wreck. We were watching it. I knew it. And that there's, like, nothing you could do at that time. That's how I felt. I don't know.
I think I share with you the difficulty of this episode because it was the same thing for me. I mean, you and I were kind of sending each other messages back and forth while I was listening to it, and it was really affecting for me. And the other, there's two other things that narratively are really I don't know, valuable or important. And one of them was this direction that Adnan went in one of these interviews with Sarah, where he said, I wouldn't have been here if I had been doing what I was supposed to be doing. And Sarah is like, wait a minute, like, what are you talking about? Like, you've maintained your innocence. This doesn't sound like something that you would say. And he goes into the direction of, if I had been practicing the right way, if I had, if I hadn't lent my cell phone to somebody else, like if I had been more vigilant, if I had been more careful.
Muslim, basically, if he had been a good Muslim.
That's what he said. Yeah. And I just think, I think about, I had this group of very close friends when I was in college who had all come from families that were very similar to the way that Sarah has described Adnan's family. And I think about, and you wrote about this in your post, that with somebody who's coming from this home and is enmeshed in this culture that's completely different, how difficult, how strange would that be for someone to be able to understand, I'm going to, I'm going to completely ignore all of the secular influences in my life and concentrate on, on purely religious things.
Yeah, I mean, kids don't do that. I mean, none of, there are very few kids who are, and I don't care what religion it is, right? There are very few kids who, as teenagers, are suddenly very pious, spiritual people. I mean, like, that's not what teenagers do. Um, and it would have been really odd. I mean, like, I've known a few in my life who have been at that age and been very, but, they're always, like, kind of the kind of the odd ones, the oddballs, because that's not what teenagers do. I mean, like, I remember my mom would say, go pray, it's time to pray. I'd say, oh, okay. And I'd go to my room and I'd start reading a book and I'd come back in 5 minutes and be like, yeah, I prayed. I mean, that's what teenagers do, right? Like, I became more observant as an adult when I had kids. I mean, this was a religious evolution. But, for Adnan to say that, that's, I think, like, kind of classic, the same kind of guilt that, like Jewish guilt and Catholic guilt. I mean, it's like that kind of guilt thing, where you carry. And the truth is, though, I mean, on one hand, maybe he was right. If he had been doing if he had been the good Muslim, none of this would happen. If he had not been hanging out with the wrong people, maybe none of this would happen. But at the same time, it is a very sound principle in Islam that if God has decreed something for you, it's going to happen. There's nothing you can do to avoid it. So it's kind of a weird... there's like this tension between but I think
yeah, that's a complicated
it's very complicated
philosophical situation to be in.
Yeah, but the onus is on human beings to do the best that you can, and then you say, I did the best I can, and then it's whatever. It's, the results are up to God. So for Adnan, it's that he didn't do the best he could. But, most 16 and 17-year-olds don't. And so I can't fault him as a kid for being a kid. Yeah.
Here's the other thing, and then I'll stop this long rambling answer to your question. But I have felt the absence of Hayes' family in this podcast for the entire time, and just like Jay, I trusted that Sarah that she would have an answer for this, and obviously she did in this episode. And I felt, I mean, obviously she went out of her way to say, in 20 years of reporting, I have not tried to get in touch with somebody as much as I tried to get in touch with this family or these his mother and brother. And that, to me, like, I went back and listened to this, I don't know, 4 or 5 minute segment of the episode about 3 different times, because I wanted to hear, how does she go from Adnan in the courtroom, seeing Hayes' mother, feeling the way that he felt about her, wishing that he could have some kind of exchange with her or empathize with her, to Hayes' mother's statement, to this carve-out, basically, where Sarah says, I wish that I had more to say about this, but I can't, so here is like every detail that I've collected so far. And she gives this kind of like this kind of like random dash of facts about Heyman Lee, and that was just so profound to me, because it was like an apology.
Yeah.
It was like she was saying, this is the most human layer I can put on this part of the story. I wish that I could put more. I know that it's complicated. I know that it makes all kinds of reason. It makes all kinds of sense why Hayes' family wouldn't want to talk to me. This is the best I can do.
Yeah, that was definitely, I think, her way of responding to the fact that a lot of people have raised that concern, but it's also the truth. He really did try everything, and we know that it's true because according to the post that was apparently by Hayes' brother on Reddit a couple weeks ago, I don't know if it was last week.
Last week.
Yeah, he said Sarah, sent me messages. Like so she did find him. She did find him, and he didn't respond, and he accepts that they didn't respond. So I think, Sarah did her due diligence, and she wanted to tell that part of the story. So, you know, there's not much more. And I actually found that random. I found it really sad.
Yeah, me too. Like so sad that it was.
Because I thought, I have a daughter who is like the same age. And I'm like, if that was all that was left of my daughter,
Mhm.
it was sad.
Yeah, yeah, I can completely identify.
Okay. I'm sorry. I'm having a tough day.
It's okay. We can wrap up if you want.
That might be best.
Okay. Um, okay. So,
Unless there's anything really pressing. But as I get
no,
into the episode, it's like I keep going back to that place.
no, I know. I feel you.
Yeah.
It's
And it was, it was not just I can imagine Adnan's like pain at not being, and Hay was his friend. I mean, Hay's brother was Adnan's friend. They got along really well. He really liked Adnan. So I can imagine Adnan's pain at not being able to like say anything to them or reach out to them. And the community felt the same way. Like I wanted to go talk to them and I couldn't. First of all, like any approach like that can be viewed as like harass, like you have to be really careful. And the lawyer's like, don't talk to anybody. So it was bad. And when Hay was missing, for those 5 or 6 weeks, every single what I did, I lived in Northern Virginia. It's on the other, about maybe 45 minutes away from where all this happened, and my parents live. And my routine was every Friday I came to my parents' house and I stayed till Sunday. I was there every weekend. And so for those 6 weeks she was missing, I remember every single weekend watching the local news with my mom and seeing Hay's picture and knowing this was the school like down the street pretty much. And, we would be like, oh my goodness, where is she? I hope she's, I'm like, we had no idea what her connection to, like my brother knew that was Adnan's ex, but I didn't know. He didn't tell me that. So, I know people in my family were like, concerned about this young missing girl, but we didn't have any idea how this was going to go.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's wrap up and just I'll remind everybody or tell everybody who likes to watch these conversations and interact with us a little bit that we're not skipping a week. So even though we don't get a serial episode this week, we'll be back on next Monday.
I'll be blogging too at my new blog. I'll be blogging this week.
Yeah, Robbie's new blog. Wish I could put it up on the screen. I probably could go back and edit that back in, but splitthemoon.com is Robbie's new blog, and I'll be having at least 2 posts up in the next day or two. And also, before we go, I wanted to thank a couple of people reached out after our last conversation, recommended a couple of journalists for me to reach out to join us. So I wanted to say thanks for people doing that. Also, at least 3, maybe more people have kind of lobbed some questions at us while we've been talking, both on the event page and also on the Twitter hashtag. So either I or Robbie or both will either get to answering those questions or build them into the next conversation. Or
is there anything that's related to what we taught? We can talk about it now if you want to.
It's not the ones that I've seen are more, they're people. Yeah, they're new directions.
Okay.
They're different from what we're doing today.
Okay.
So maybe you and I can talk about them offline maybe and come back. But Robbie, I just wanted to let you know that I completely understand that this is a difficult thing to talk about and think about and go through, and I appreciate your bravery and joining me every week and kind of talking about something that must feel a little bit like an emotional dissection.
No, thanks. I appreciate it. It's like in this space where, and I know Don's family feels like this too, where we are so grateful for all the attention, but we're almost fearful that it's gonna all go away and he'll be forgotten.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, you kind of want, you're like, man, when it's over, we can finally go back to like the case, and it not be about the show. So it's
Mm-hmm.
anyway. But as long as it's there, I appreciate these conversations. So thank you for hosting them.
Mm-hmm. I hope everyone has a good week and a good time away from work, hopefully, and we'll see you
Happy
back.
Thanksgiving to everybody.
Bye.
Bye, guys.